That's insane! See, the vastly expanding industry is taking the world by storm, and that's why esports fascinates us. However, it has been a largely controversial topic on whether esports is a real traditional sport. See, Manuel and I wanted to see whether video game players at Walton High School believed that esports is a sport.
To test this, we used 2 sample z-tests for difference in population proportions. Our null hypothesis for this research was that the proportion of Walton students who play video games and believe esports is a sport is equal to the proportion of Walton students who do not play video games and believe esports is a sport. Because we wanted to see if there was a relationship between playing video games and believing esports is a sport, our alternate hypothesis that the proportion of Walton students who play video games and believe esports is a sport is greater than the proportion of Walton students who do not play video games and believe esports is a sport. To gather our data, we employed a multi-stage sampling method. Our sample was chosen by randomly selecting one homeroom from each grade level. In other words, we stratified by grade level and then employed cluster sampling within each grade level. To select one homeroom per grade, we gave each homeroom in each grade a number, then using a random number generator in the calculator, sampled the homeroom whose number was chosen. We attempted to have everyone in each homeroom chosen answer the survey.
In our survey, we asked them basic questions like their gender and grade level. We also asked more involved questions related to video games.
Now we're going to look at the data we collected. 63% of all respondents believed that esports is a sport. Out of this 63%, the majority of the students who believed esports is a sport came from the 10th and 12th graders. In our sample, the senior homeroom we surveyed and the sophomore homeroom we surveyed has the highest percentage of respondents who believed esports is a sport. This histogram above shows the distribution of the number of video games owned by the respondents. Next, we compared the number of hours on average per week of physical activities to the number of hours a week playing video games. The best trend line that we found was a linear regression, and in this linear regression, it was weak and positive, with our R value being 0.254. These box plots compared the distribution of number of video games owned by different grade levels in our sample. Because all of the data sets were skewed, the median will be used for comparison. So the 9th grade homeroom has the lowest median at 2.5, and the 12th grade homeroom has the highest median at 70. So this means that
we conducted a 2-sample hypothesis test to determine if the proportion of regular video game players at Walton High School who think esports is a sport is equal to the proportion of non-video game players at Walton High School who think esports is a sport. Our P1 was the proportion of video game players who think esports is a sport. Our P2 was the proportion of non-video game players who think esports is a sport. P-hat1 was equal to the proportion of video game players from the sample who think esports is a sport. P-hat2 is the proportion of non-video game players from the sample who think esports is a sport. Our HO was P1 minus P2 equals 0, and our HA was P1 minus P2 is greater than 0. We had an alpha of 0.05. To proceed with our hypothesis test, we had to make sure the conditions for conducting the test were met. An appropriate sampling method was used to preserve randomness. Because we were sampling without replacement, however, we had to check the 10%, we had to make sure that the 10% condition was met. There are definitely more than 670 students at Walton High School. Therefore, the level of dependence in the sample is negligible. Also, the results of the 2 samples are independent of each other. Finally, we have to check the normal condition. This first sample had a sample size of 26 and a p-hat value of 0.38. 26 times 0.38 is equal to 10, which is greater than or equal to 10. 26 times 1 minus 0.38 is equal to 16, which is also greater than or equal to 10. The second sample had a sample size of 21 and a p-hat value of 0.76. 21 times 1 minus 0.76 is equal to 5, which is less than 10, meaning that the normal condition is not met. Because the conditions for this procedure is not met, it is not safe to proceed with 2 sample z-test for P1 minus P2. However, for the sake of this project, we will be continuing with the test.
with caution.
Our combined proportion for this procedure was 0.55. This gave us a z-score of 2.59 and a p-value of 0.00485. Because the p-value 0.00485 is less than alpha 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis that the proportion of students at Walton High School that do not play video games and believe esports is a sport is the same as the proportion of students at Walton High School that do play video games and believe esports is a sport, in favor of the alternate hypothesis. There is statistically significant evidence at the 0.05 level that the alternate hypothesis that the proportion of students at Walton High School that do play video games and believe esports is a sport is greater than the proportion of students at Walton High School that do not play video games and think esports is a sport is true. We could have also come to this conclusion by observing that the 95% confidence interval of p hat 1 minus p hat 2 is 0.116 to 0.638. Because the confidence interval does not include 0, we know that to reject the null hypothesis at the 0.05 level.
After collecting our data and analyzing our results, we had a couple issues in our project. So one large problem in our project was the manner in which surveys were distributed to homerooms. Because we used QR codes that directed students to a Google form, some students did not know how to scan those QR codes, so they might have not filled it out or completed the survey. Another problem we had was the survey itself. We did not make the questions required to be answered, so many students had responses with blank answer choices. So we had to take those responses out since they were invalid.
From the inference test we conducted, we can conclude that there is no relationship between playing video games and believing esports is a sport for students at Walton High School. Because this is an observational study, we cannot prove causation. So it would be inappropriate to conclude that playing video games causes someone to believe esports is a sport.
Now remember, kids, association does not mean causation.
And don't skew your data.